Despite modern hypercars getting faster than ever, what I want to focus on this video is that your everyday car and heck even sports cars and supercars are actually getting lower top speeds than their past counterparts. So why are car top speeds stagnating if not regressing on some models? The C6 Corvette ZR1 went 205 miles per hour, yet the C7 Z06 only goes 204 miles per hour. The C8 Z06 goes an even slower 188 miles per hour. And even the C7 ZR1, if we do want to mention it to compare ZR1 to ZR1, was barely any faster than the Z06 model of that generation, going around 209-ish miles per hour. Moving on to a European car, the 2010 BMW M6 can go well over 200 miles per hour, yet the modern M6 only goes 155 miles per hour with a factory limiter. But even if you remove the factory limiter, it can only go 190 miles per hour. On the topic of stagnation, while the Revuelto didn't go backwards like the other two, it did stagnate with a repeat entry of 217 miles per hour, just like its predecessor, the Aventador. There are many more examples of sports and supercars with lower or same top speeds as previous models, but I'm not here to list them all, but you can comment down below more if you would like. I'm sure there are some instances of cars going up, especially in the case of smaller cars that only had top speeds of 120 or 130 for their models anyway, so it's easier for them to go up to 140 or 150 over time. And sure, you could make the argument that the McLaren Speedtail is a much faster car than anything Lamborghini has made in recent times, yet compared to the naturally aspirated F1 with pretty low horsepower comparatively to modern cars. So let's dive into the reasons why top speed isn't as important as you've been marketed into thinking, and why it's okay for cars in the future to stay where they are or even go back a little bit. The first reason is fuel economy. MPG and emission standards are important to selling a car. Miles per gallon pleases the consumer, emission standards pleases the lawmakers. So you need to make a car that gets great fuel economy in order to get mass appeal to actually sell it to a ton of people to make a profit as a business. You also need to deal with increasingly stringent emission standards that are coming out, since EPA guidelines have only been getting stricter, not less strict over time. So cars, because of that, have to some extent regressed due to the fact that in order to meet some of those requirements, the technology to do so has not quite been made. It's also a very frustrating thing for companies to deal with, because imagine spending all this money and R&D knowing full well to not even go forwards, because a lot of these companies, what they were doing is, as emission standards got more strict, like I said, if their technology remained the same, then their top speed actually regressed because the restrictions got higher, but their technology didn't advance to meet the restrictions, so they used the same technology, but they just nerfed their capabilities a little bit. For companies that increased their technology, that invested in better technology to keep up with the standards, oftentimes they find themselves breaking even, basically stagnating or just in time meeting the emission quotas. And that must be frustrating from an engineering standpoint, because it feels like you've not accomplished anything. Like, oh, our previous vehicle, after all the money spent, goes like 190. Our new vehicle still goes 190. Like, did we actually go forward? As a company, it saves you money to not focus and over-engineer top speed to please the 1,000 or so car enthusiasts who are going to buy your supercar every year, when instead you can make a sports car with a significantly lower top speed that pleases several hundreds of thousands of consumers each year, which will just earn you more money. So less technology for more money, because at the end of the day, more people don't actually care about top speed. We've all heard the saying, win on Sunday, sell on Monday. What we see on TV, on the internet, about cars racing, because I mean, come on, it's just cool to hear the roar of the engine. And even if you're not super into cars, the racetrack is equivalent to the battlefield in war. It is a battlefield for engineering and technology development for cars. And because it's such a widely appealing spectator sport across the world, what happens in racing does affect public influence. Now, of course, I've mentioned safety regulations earlier on, and that absolutely is one of the reason racing cars aren't focusing on top speed as much. Now, the cool part is they still want to find a way to go faster, and the beauty of limitations is sometimes you find ways to work under those limitations, to break your own limits within, to learn new things to work on those boundaries. You develop something called efficiency. Race cars are actually still getting faster and faster lap times compared to their predecessors. Even track-based road cars or sports cars are also getting much faster track times than they ever could in the past. So in a sense, they're absolutely moving forward at the cost of, again, this number going down, the number that some people are super obsessed with and hate seeing go backwards. But it comes at the advantage of them getting better acceleration, better cornering, better handling, better grip, better feel, and better entry speeds, and so on and so forth. Having more gears with closer gearing combined with better grip at the cost of having a lower top speed was just the meta that was optimized for winning a lot of these races. So again, what consumers see on television for these racing events absolutely starts to dig their way into their minds, which is why modern consumers tend to value 0 to 60, they tend to value tire grip, they tend to value how cars actually just overall feel instead of haha big number big, it's so car good. Another reason cars have regressed or stagnated for top speed is tire ratings. Now this is two reasons, one of which has to do with the actual limitation of the technology, the other one has to do with just manufacturers saving money. So we'll talk about the boring one first. V6 Mustangs and Camaros are usually limited to 112 or 120 miles per hour. A lot of economy cars are also limited for the same reasons, despite the fact that a lot of these cars are able to go 130, 140, or even 150 miles per hour with just a tune. And even sports cars are still limited to 149 or 155 miles per hour for this very same reason. So if you've ever wondered why electronic limiters are picking this speed specifically, is because I kid you not, that is literally the exact speed rating of a tire that is likely being used by the car. A good example of this, again, back to motorcycles briefly, because cars and motorcycles share a lot in common for technology. My Porsche HD Night Rod had a 149 mile per hour top speed limiter, because that's the exact speed limit that the Michelin Scorchers that it came with were rated for. Now, this happens again with my FXDR. It's limited to 160 miles per hour because due to the tires it comes with, despite the actual bike being able to go 176 miles per hour on better tires that I bought for it. Which, by the way, is not a fun experience on a fairingless bike. It feels like it's trying to rip you off the handlebars. I did that in Mexico, of course, and I'm never doing that again. Now, the reasoning for this lowering of top speed is rather weak because it just has to do with manufacturers cutting corners and trying to save the money, aka they value themselves more than they value you, the consumer. The vehicle is more than capable of getting a better top speed, but due to the bean counters wanting to shave some bucks, they roll the cars out of the assembly line with less than adequate tires. Since tires are a wear item anyways, this isn't too upsetting because you, the consumer, you're literally going to change them later on at some point. So for anyone with a performance vehicle, you'd be surprised how much better your car will drive with just a simple change of tires. Now on to the less boring reason and the more understandable reason. Even with god tier tires, the absolute pinnacle of current tire technology, we are still struggling with grip. The rapid advancement of engine and transmission technology actually is outpacing tires by a decent margin. We've already had transmissions that are rated for 400 miles per hour plus, as well as engines capable of making north of 5,000 horsepower for quite some time now. The only thing I see causing cars to finally go to their potential is if we just straight up found a way to subvert the need to use tires, because the friction and resistance they have to deal with, and the wear and the grip and the sticking and launching the cars properly, it's such a dangerous mix that they have to be tuned for, and finely tuned for, by the way, because you don't want a car losing grip or losing control at well over 300 miles per hour, right? And that's why it took us a long time to get a production car to even break the 300 mile per hour barrier, because tires are a tricky thing to deal with, because they're literally the thing that touches the ground for your car. Nothing else in the car even matters. You could have the greatest jizz-worthy transmission, engine, most beautifully styled car ever. If it doesn't have tires, it's not going anywhere. It's probably better that if we found a way to hover vehicles a little bit above the ground, maybe, but even then we've literally made hover vehicles in the past before, right, that were actually widely used, discontinued. Like a lot of people who try to think of future technology don't realize that a lot of that future technology is actually based on stuff we've already made and found doesn't at all work the way we thought it did. That brings me to my final point as to why car top speeds are regressing or stagnating, and this is probably the biggest reasoning. It's overrated. Less is more, and times are changing. Again, some car enthusiasts probably really love top speed, but your average consumer and even sports car enthusiasts like Corvette buyers, like Lamborghini buyers, like BMW owners, as I mentioned in the start, their cars are actually seeing a regression or stagnation at top speed, and you don't see any consumers complaining about it because they all came to several reasonable conclusions. They realize they don't need to go that fast, and they also realize that watching television or watching racing or watching movies or playing video games, that cars with lower top speeds actually can still get better lap times, which makes them feel like the car they bought is still sportier than its predecessor. Let's also talk about other technology. So we've already talked about motorcycles a lot, and again, they kind of go hand in hand with cars in terms of advancement. They have also stagnated a lot in their top speed progression, aside from a few hyperbike outliers, again, just like how hypercars numbers for cars are still going faster, but again, the average motorcycle or even super sports or sport motorcycles are actually seeing themselves stagnate. It's because people who ride those bikes are like, especially since you feel the wind on you. Like I said, I feel like I'm about to get ripped off my handlebars on a fairingless bike. A lot of companies kind of had an under the table gentleman's agreement of we should probably stop doing this because it was literally dangerous. A less under the table thing is a more obvious economic reason, and for that we have to turn to the airliner industry. Now, a lot of people these days unfortunately have probably forgotten about the supersonic Concorde, and they probably only know Boeing 747s or Airbuses or other subsonic airliners. But if you're someone like me, you grew up knowing about the supersonic Concorde, if not even having ridden the supersonic Concorde. Now, why is the supersonic Concorde not made anymore? Why does it not fly anymore? Why don't we use it anymore? If it is faster than any subsonic airliner, can get you from point A to point B, super duper fast top speed, it's because we realized we didn't need to go that fast, because physics more than anything stops our dumb monkey brain desires. Let's actually just zone in on one of the biggest issues the Concorde had. The Concorde could not fly supersonic over land. You know what actually happens when you fly supersonic over land? Every single house beneath you, first off, not only do they hear the sonic boom that wakes them up from literally any activity they're doing, it will shatter their windows. You know how much that costs for people to constantly fix their houses? You know how much that would cost for insurance companies to deal with? You know how much that costs for nations to deal with, because they have to constantly deal with supersonic vehicles flying over their airspace and destroying literal property? So because of that, the Concorde was quickly restricted to supersonic flight over sea only. This basically neutered a lot of the Concorde's routes, so it's already not usable over a massive land space like Asia, or if it is in the United States, it's to take roundabout ways to cross over to California. It can't just fly over the continent because it will literally destroy every single house along the way. Like, sonic booms are very, very dangerous. They're not at all like what you think general media has taught the modern generation to think about. Again, my generation grew up with this. I remember hearing neighbors tell me stories of sonic booms breaking their windows. They did not enjoy the Concorde. The Concorde has a lot of love and hate, especially in Britain, because I do have extended family that is in Britain, because it has caused a lot more trouble to the average citizen than it did benefit. The ability to go supersonic and super duper high top speed, big numbers, big, wasn't as important as how inconvenient it was for everything else. Again, it has to take roundabout routes, which then increases the fuel consumption, which then costs more for the company to fly, which then means the consumer has to pay even more for the ticket. So we had to phase it out, and we also had to take a back seat to the obsession of top speed. So back to cars. If cars went any faster than they already do, they'll encounter the same issues but in different ways than planes already have. Think about everything I already mentioned in this video as well as more. They'll add stress to their tires, they'll damage the roads more than they already do, and they'll damage themselves faster. As I mentioned earlier in this video, tire technology is still struggling to keep up with current hypercar speeds, and a lot of manufacturers don't want to pony out a lot of money to put expensive tires on a car that will ultimately be driven the 70 miles per hour most of its life anyways. It doesn't need to have 186 mile per hour or 200 mile per hour speed rated tires just so you can gear the car to go 200 miles per hour, just for it to now have slower acceleration and worse fuel economy. It's better to add more gears, gear it shorter, and then give it a lower top speed to get better fuel economy, to accelerate better, to handle in and out of corners better, and accelerate out of those corners better, also wearing its tires down less. Ultimately, what sold cars has changed in the same way that the Concorde and what sold tickets for airliners has also changed. Consumers realized they didn't care if the flight was 1 or 2 hours shorter on the Concorde, because they would still get stuck at the airport, especially in a post-2001 world. They also realized that the overly roundabout routes the Concorde had to take made it hard, where you have to sometimes even stop at one more hub than you wanted to, or would have to transfer anyways. Like if you're trying to get to California, if you started in Britain, you would fly from Britain, usually land somewhere on the East Coast in the United States like New York, and then you would transfer into like a normal subsonic plane like a Boeing anyways that just goes all the way over to California now. So wouldn't you rather just get on the Boeing and just go straight to California and not have that transfer flight in between? And ultimately, that's why top speed finds itself hitting a limiter for almost every industry we've encountered for. So if it meant that we had to shave off some miles per hour at the trade-off of getting way better acceleration, way better handling, and way better reliability, and way better fuel economy, I'm not gonna lie, I'll take that. We're not going backwards at all. We just started to care about different things. Anyways, that's it for this video. If you enjoy automotive content, then make sure to subscribe and like this video. Share this to your waifu pillow, and see y'all next time. Blade Angel out.